The humid Florida air clung to Elias Carter's skin as he sat in the cramped office of the Tampa Bay Tribune, staring at the rejection email on his screen for the third time that morning. 6 months ago, he'd been a respected investigative journalist at the Denver Post. Then came the pharmaceutical exposé, the one about a major corporation falsifying drug trial data that fell apart when his key source recanted. The subsequent lawsuit, the humiliation, the whispers that followed him like a shadow. He'd been forced to resign, and no major outlet would touch him. Now, at 42, he was freelancing for regional papers, chasing stories that nobody else wanted. That's when he saw it. A small article buried on page 7 of the Miami Herald. 3 missing persons in the last 8 weeks across central Florida, all vanished without a trace, all from small communities between Tampa and Ocala. No bodies, no ransom demands, no clear pattern except geography and timing. The police attributed it to runaways and transients. The public barely noticed. But Elias had learned one thing in his career. The stories nobody was telling were often the most important ones. He booked a motel room in Ocala and drove south, hands gripping the steering wheel tighter with each mile. This was his chance, not to prove some grand theory, but to prove to himself that he wasn't finished, that his instincts weren't broken. The first person he interviewed was Marcus Webb, the father of Jennifer Webb, 24, who disappeared 8 weeks earlier. Marcus worked as a mechanic and lived in a modest home on the outskirts of town. When Elias arrived, Marcus was sitting on the porch, smoking a cigarette with the mechanical precision of someone doing it out of habit rather than enjoyment. His eyes were hollow, the kind of hollow that only comes from sleepless nights and a hope that's slowly dying. "The police don't care," Marcus said flatly, not bothering with pleasantries. "They looked for 2 weeks, found nothing and moved on. They think she ran off with some boyfriend. But Jennifer didn't do that. She was saving money for nursing school. She had a routine, work at the grocery store, come home, study. That was Jenny." Elias took notes, asking about her friends, her habits, whether she'd mentioned anything unusual. Marcus answered mechanically, and Elias could feel the man's desperation radiating off him like heat from summer asphalt. By the time Elias left, he had a direction: the grocery store where Jennifer worked and the route she walked home. The next lead came from an unexpected source: Naomi Yazzie, a nurse at the regional medical center who'd heard about Elias asking questions around town. She called his motel room that evening, her voice careful and measured. "I heard you're looking into the disappearances," she said. "I work nights at the hospital. I've noticed something the media hasn't reported. 2 of the 3 missing persons, Jennifer Webb and a man named David Torres, came through our emergency room in the weeks before they disappeared. Both came in with similar injuries, unexplained lacerations on their shoulders and backs. Both claimed they didn't remember how they got them. Both were treated and released, but the incidents were documented." Elias felt something shift in his chest, that electric current that ran through him when a story started to take shape. "Can you get me those medical records?" "That's illegal," Naomi said quietly, but she didn't hang up. "Meet me tomorrow, 7 a.m., the parking lot behind the hospital." When Elias hung up the phone, he realized his hands were trembling, not from fear, but from something else. The feeling of being alive again, the feeling of purpose returning. He lay in that motel room until 3 in the morning, unable to sleep, his mind building connections, spinning theories, unexplained injuries, 3 missing persons, a pattern emerging from the chaos. And somewhere in this humid, sprawling landscape of central Florida, someone was taking people, someone with a plan, someone who wouldn't stop with 3. Naomi arrived at the hospital parking lot in her silver Honda CR-V, the early morning light casting long shadows across the empty spaces. Elias was already there, 2 coffees in hand from a 24-hour diner. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, her black hair pulled back tightly, but her expression was determined. She handed him a manila folder without ceremony. "Third patient," she said, not bothering to get out of her car. A woman named Patricia Donovan, 58, came in 5 weeks ago. She's still missing. Like the others, she couldn't explain the injuries. And like the others, nobody connected the dots. Elias opened the folder with steady hands, though his heart was pounding. 3 medical records, 3 sets of lacerations on shoulders and upper backs. Clean cuts, not random violence. Deliberate, precise. The kind of cuts made by someone who knew what they were doing. "Why are you helping me?" he asked, looking up at her. Naomi's jaw tightened. "Because I worked with Patricia Donovan. She was a good woman. She had grandchildren. And something about this is wrong. Deeply wrong. The injuries, the timing, the way the police just gave up." She paused, her fingers drumming against the steering wheel. "And because I've learned not to ignore the feeling when something is hunting." Over the next 3 days, Elias and Naomi built a timeline. They visited the places where the missing persons were last seen. They interviewed family members, co-workers, and friends. They mapped the geography of Central Florida, Tampa, Ocala, smaller towns in between. And they found something the police had missed entirely. All 3 missing persons had been seen in the same area within 48 hours before they vanished. A stretch of rural road near Dade City, a gas station, a laundromat. Different times, different days, but the same geographical zone. It was predatory geography, the pattern of a hunter scouting territory. Elias set up a makeshift investigation center in his motel room, covering the walls with photographs, maps, and newspaper clippings. Naomi brought her laptop and access to some hospital databases. They were careful, never crossing legal lines, but walking right up to the edge of them. Elias had learned that lesson from his previous failure. This time, everything had to be airtight. On the 4th day, Naomi discovered something that made them both go silent. She'd been reviewing emergency room logs, cross-referencing them with missing persons reports across 3 counties, not just their immediate area. What she found was staggering. 7 missing persons in the last 2 years, within a 100-mile radius of their investigation zone. 7. The police in different jurisdictions had never connected them because each department was small, under-resourced, and overwhelmed. "This is a serial killer," Naomi said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's been operating here for 2 years, and nobody noticed because the victims are scattered across different counties. The system isn't set up to catch someone like this." Elias felt the weight of what she'd just said settle over him like a physical thing. A serial killer, not just a predator taking people, but someone organized, patient, intelligent enough to understand that police jurisdictions were barriers to investigation. Someone who'd selected this region deliberately because of its fragmentation. That evening, Elias did something he shouldn't have done. He contacted his former editor at the Denver Post, a man named Richard who'd stood by him during the scandal, even when the lawsuits were flying. He explained what he'd found, carefully omitting Naomi's name and how they'd obtained some of the information. Richard listened in silence, then said something that both terrified and thrilled Elias. "If you can substantiate this, it's a national story. But Elias, be careful. You're not dealing with someone who makes mistakes. People like this, they calculate, they plan, and if they think you're getting close—" Richard didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. That night, Elias lay awake thinking about the 3 people, Jennifer, David, and Patricia, and about the 4 others Naomi had found. 7 lives interrupted, 7 families destroyed. And somewhere out there, someone was probably scouting their next location, their next victim, someone who, based on the timeline, was accelerating. The gaps between abductions were getting shorter. Elias pulled out his phone and texted Naomi, "I think he's going to take someone soon. We need to find out where." Her response came back within minutes. "I know. I've been thinking the same thing. That's what terrifies me." The breakthrough came from an unlikely source, a gas station attendant named Marcus, no relation to Jennifer Webb's father, who worked the night shift at a speedway near Dade City. When Elias and Naomi showed him photographs of the missing persons, his face went pale. That woman. He pointed to Patricia Donovan's photo. She came in here. I remember because she asked me how to get to a specific address, somewhere off Route 301. She seemed confused, like she'd been driving aimlessly. I gave her directions, and she left. That was the last time I saw her alive, I assume. They pressed him for details. The address she'd asked about was rural, isolated, a property that had been listed for sale for 3 years with no takers. When they ran a property search, the owner's name made Elias's breath catch. Daniel Kraus, 51, retired from the Florida Department of Corrections, a man with access to the criminal mind, a man who understood how to think like a predator. "We need to go to the police," Naomi said when they discovered this. "We have enough." But Elias hesitated. His instincts told him that going to the police now, without more concrete evidence, would alert Kraus. And without a body, without physical evidence linking him to the abductions, what did they really have? Geographical coincidence, a property connection, medical records showing injuries that could be explained a dozen different ways. It was circumstantial. It was the kind of evidence that would get an investigation opened, yes, but it would also warn Kraus that he was being watched. "We need to be smarter," Elias said. "We need to prove he's actively hunting. We need to catch him in the act." The plan formed between them over coffee at a small diner on the edge of Ocala. They would set up surveillance on Kraus's property. They would document his movements, his patterns. They would look for signs of his next victim. It was dangerous, legally and physically, but Elias had learned something in the past week that changed everything. When you're hunting a predator, you can't afford to think like a law-abiding citizen. You have to think like the prey. They began monitoring Kraus's routine. He was methodical. He kept a schedule. He drove certain routes at certain times, always late at night. And 3 times in the past week, Elias saw him stop at the same rest area on Route 301, a place where women traveling alone might stop to use the bathroom or stretch their legs, a place where someone could be watching, waiting. Naomi brought a small camera, and they documented his presence. They photographed him, a nondescript man with thinning hair and tired eyes. He looked like anyone. That was perhaps the most terrifying thing about him. He could be anyone. He could be your neighbor, your co-worker, the man behind you at the grocery store. But on the 7th day of their surveillance, something changed. A woman's car broke down near Kraus's property, a genuine mechanical failure, not part of their plan. Her name was Sophie, 26, and she'd been trying to reach 8AA when a man approached her, offering to help. It was Kraus. And something about the way he was looking at her, the predatory calculation in his eyes, told Elias that they were witnessing the beginning of the hunt. Without thinking, Elias stepped out of the car where he and Naomi had been watching from a distance. He called out to Kraus, identifying himself as a journalist and saying he had some questions about the missing persons cases. It was reckless. It was dangerous. But it broke the moment. Kraus's eyes went cold, and he walked away from Sophie without another word. Elias realized in that instant what he'd done. He'd shown his hand. He'd let Kraus know that he was being investigated. And now, Kraus would disappear, or he'd accelerate his plans, or worse, he'd decide that the only way to protect himself was to eliminate the threat. That threat was Elias. That night, Elias received a package at his motel room. Inside was a photograph of him sleeping in his room, taken through the window. Taped to the back was a simple message in printed letters. "You should have minded your business." Elias's hands shook as he showed it to Naomi. This was no longer a story. This was a predator who decided his hunter had become the hunted. Elias called the police the next morning. He had no choice. The photograph was evidence of a direct threat, and it forced him into a position he'd been avoiding: cooperation with law enforcement. When Detective Sarah Chen arrived at his motel room, she was professional but skeptical. A woman in her 50s who'd seen too many amateur investigators complicate cases with their interference. "You've contaminated this entire investigation," she said coldly, looking at the photograph. Anything you've collected could be inadmissible. You've alerted a potential suspect, and you've put yourself in danger. But you have probable cause now, Elias countered. You can search his property. You can bring him in. We can. But if he's smart, and it seems he is, there won't be anything there. Serial killers with his level of patience don't keep trophies on their own property. She looked at him with something close to pity. You wanted a story. Now you've got one. But the price might be higher than you expected. The search warrant came through by early afternoon. Detective Chen led a team to Krause's property, a sprawling rural home surrounded by dense woods and accessible only by a long dirt road. Elias and Naomi watched from a distance as the police worked, their hope fading with each hour that passed without a discovery. No bodies, no evidence of abduction, no obvious signs of foul play. Krause wasn't even at the property. He'd disappeared sometime in the night. The moment he'd realized his cover was blown, the investigation shifted into high gear, but Elias could feel the momentum shifting away from them. Without physical evidence, without a body, without Krause in custody, the story was becoming abstract. 3 missing persons, a retired corrections officer who'd fled, suspicions and circumstances, but no proof. 3 days later, Elias received a package at his motel. This one contained a thumb drive. He opened it with trembling hands, Naomi standing beside him. Inside were video files, dozens of them. What they contained made Elias vomit. The videos showed everything: Krause stalking his victims, the moment of abduction, the aftermath. Each video was dated, methodical documentation of his crimes. It was the digital record of a serial killer's work, preserved like a sick trophy. And it included footage of Jennifer, David, and Patricia in their final hours. It included footage of the other 4 victims, whose names they'd never known. But it also included something else. A message, recorded directly to Elias. "You wanted the truth," Krause said in the video, his voice calm and almost conversational. "I'm giving it to you. 7 people, over 2 years. Careful planning, careful execution. I'm smarter than the police. I'm smarter than the system that's supposed to catch people like me. And now I'm giving you the gift of knowing this. You can publish this. You can be famous, but you'll always know that I let you win. I chose to stop. I chose to disappear. That's the real story, not the crimes, but the fact that I controlled everything, including how this ends." The video ended. Elias and Naomi sat in silence for a long time. Then Naomi spoke, her voice steady, but carrying the weight of something broken inside her. "He's not done. This is a message. This is him saying goodbye to one life before he starts another." She was right. The FBI profile confirmed it. Krause had likely planned his escape for months. The crimes on the drive were his confession and his insurance policy, evidence that would keep law enforcement busy while he disappeared into a new identity, a new region, a new hunting ground. They found him 3 months later, or rather they found his body. He'd been struck by a train on the tracks outside of Jacksonville, and dental records confirmed the identification. The official determination was suicide, guilt driving him to self-destruction. But Elias never believed that. He believed that Krause had simply moved on to a new phase. He believed the train was a stage, a final act in the narrative Krause had been constructing all along. And he believed that somewhere in America, another family was about to discover that their loved one had vanished without explanation. When Elias's story was finally published, a comprehensive, harrowing account of the investigation, it won regional recognition. Not the national spotlight he'd hoped for, but enough to restore some credibility to his name. Enough for other outlets to start calling again. Enough to remember what it felt like to be a journalist with purpose. But late at night, in quiet moments, Elias would think about Krause's message. About the way the killer had controlled everything, including the revelation of his crimes. About the victims whose names would be forgotten once the headlines moved on. and about the uncomfortable truth that sometimes, in trying to expose the darkness, you only succeed in giving it a brighter platform from which to operate. Naomi had returned to her nursing work, but something had shifted in her. She'd seen the underside of the world, not the mystical darkness her ancestors spoke of, but the very real darkness that human beings were capable of creating. And she'd learned that some wounds don't heal, they just become part of who you are. The last time Elias saw her, she told him something that would stay with him forever. "We caught one killer. There are thousands of others we'll never know about. The system is broken not because it's incompetent, but because it's designed to fail the people who need it most." The case was closed. The story was told. But the hunting continued, somewhere in America, in the gaps between jurisdictions and the spaces where police resources ran thin. And the predators, patient and intelligent, continued their careful work in the shadows.